Alright, time to record another episode. Hopefully, we can get this one down in time and not be too late on it. I mean, good luck with that. Time travel. Hold on. I'm getting really weird deja vu. I I already recorded this, didn't I? Wait, I don't know if I even wrote it yet. Hold on, I'll be right back. I gotta clear my head. Oh, damn, that was close. Past me, didn't even know I hit him. Can't meet your future self. Anyways, how does time travel work? Why does it work? And how would you do it in a more inspired and interesting way than a part time podcaster who thinks he's clever? All and more on this episode of Why Are You Talking About This? Nerd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WAYTAT Nerd. I am your host, William, and I will be your guide through the world of time travel today, and asking if the carpet of time matches the drapes of time. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me to have my show blasting into your eardrums, even if it's because you needed a soundtrack for when you did another loop back through the timeline to make it to date night. Alright, so as far as updates go, if this all goes according to plan, I will be posting this the day after Valentine's Day. Got that right? Um, Regardless, you shouldn't be listening to this on Valentine's Day, even if I had posted it on Valentine's Day, because you either have a partner to cuddle with or an OnlyFans model to give absurd amounts of money to because you're lonely. Also, if you're going to be in Vancouver, Washington today, please make sure to stop by the Mystic Luna pop up to buy some jewelry and check out Win Kashika on Twitch. As of right now, it's the most I can do to support my peeps. Give them a shout out. Also, to my beautiful, amazing, awesome girlfriend, I love you, baby. Happy Valentine's Day. But, okay, enough with the sappiness and the shout outs. Let's get on to the show. Okay, so we're going to be talking about time travel and all the wacky weirdness with it. Which, if you don't know what that is, this is the one time I'm not really going to give you a definition. It's what it says on the tin. Traveling backwards and forwards at a significant amount in time. Now, while it's a staple in a lot of fiction, this is one of the few things that don't exist in our real world at all and has no real parallel. Like, sure, we don't have dragons, but we do have big fuck off animals, and dinosaurs used to exist. We don't have magic, but if you've ever seen a video on chemical reactions or quantum physics, that shit is basically magic we understand. But time travel, we have zero comparison in the real world, which makes it both very difficult to use and also very, very useful. When it's used in stories, it's used for a number of purposes. As a convenient spell or ability to have, like in some high fantasy, using time dilation to restore things or show events that happened in a distant past. Or as a plot device or Deus Ex Machina, where the characters use time travel to reverse something horrific happening, or because the writer wrote themselves into a corner. Sometimes it's a superhero's power to go back in time and jump forward again. Other times it's used for character introspection, meeting their past or future selves and learning from the experience. But oftentimes, time travel ends up dominating the story it's in. And why is that? Well, because put simply, it's cool as fuck. And very interesting. Even when it's not the main plot, which is the other usage that we didn't even bring up. Having time travel in your story is a surefire way to make your story quickly about only that. But regardless of its role in the story, there's some broad categories that time travel stories tend to fall into. First is fighting fate. This is where the protagonists go into the future to see that everything has gone to absolute shit. So they go back to the present to find a way to solve the problem that doesn't end with the future being awful. For an extra knife twisting, reveal that there is no way to avoid a bad outcome and that they're fucked regardless. But this one is especially seen in a lot of superhero stuff where the heroes are close to falling apart, like as a team, and they go into the future and find out that the team splitting up leads directly to Nazis 2 Electric Choo Choo. Also, if you were guessing that was a jab at Elon Musk, yes, it was. Second is the stable time loop. In this one, no one can change time, since it's already in the timeline. Basically, that when you go forwards or backwards, time changes to where whatever you do is whatever always happened. So, like in Futurama, if you kill your grandfather by accident, you end up becoming your grandfather, and the reason why he was dead was because no one knew how he died, but you do look a lot like him, so it's just kind of assumed that he died in the war. The third is setting right what once was wrong, or sometimes setting wrong what once was right. These are two sides of the same coin that's usually heroic and villainous, respectively. This is basically something happened in the past that we don't like, so we're taking it upon ourselves to go back and change it. You know, because when humans mess with the natural order of things, it always works out exactly how we want to. Just don't look at humanity's long history of doing exactly that and it never working out for us. Fourth is the reset, where someone changes the timeline, like in the above, and now we need to go back and fix it because we realize, uh-oh, that had consequences we weren't stoked about. And now it's our job to go back and make what was supposed to happen happen. Like if you go back in time and make sure Hitler died in World War I, and then it turns out him coming to power prevented a much, much smarter, more strategic, more brutal fascist to rise to power and kill about 3 times the people and conquer all of Europe before he was killed. Well, now you have to jump back in time and make sure Hitler survives World War I, which is, sucky, but hey, at least this time you're doing the right thing. Kind of, by the transitive property. Utilitarian, from a utilitarian perspective, at least. Fifth is being trapped in the past, which is, again, exactly as it sounds. And for this one, your protagonists either have to find their way back or accept their lot in life, that this is just their life now, and they need to lay low and stay quiet to avoid fucking up the timeline too much. There's also the related trapped in the future, like Fry, but that one is a lot easier to deal with. No need to lie low, and you also either make it out immediately, because time travel is a normal technology you have, or you can't ever make it back, because forward time travel is easier than backwards, or you get frozen or something like that. Of course, we have the most recently made famous by Endgame, the alternate timeline. In this one, the way to answer the time travel question is just to say that you're the vehicle for branching universes. That once you time travel, you can't go back because you're not in the same world line anymore and are instead on a branch of the original. Which is really fucking sad when you think about it, because there's so many realities in fiction where if this is what they operate on, are just incredibly fucked up beyond all recognition. I mean, think about that with like the Endgame timeline. All the superheroes just disappeared. Like all the ones that survived the snap just are gone now because they went back in time, but they're on a different timeline, and that original timeline is just fucked up. Seventh is the time loop, or the Groundhog's Day, where you're repeating the same series of events over and over again, hoping to eventually break out of it. Of course, there's stories in fiction where this is impossible, and instead focus on the protagonist doing more and more wild and depraved shit until they fall into a deep depression and eventually go mad. You know, just girly things. Eighth is San Dimas Time, named after Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because in most time travel media, You can't have running out of time being the primary motivation for your protagonist. But in this version of time travel, either the available time travel window is very narrow, or alternatively, there's a narrow window of time where protagonists are allowed to exist in. Like in Bill and Ted, no matter where they travel, time is moving in real time and they're essentially parallel traveling across the timeline. Which actually brings us pretty smoothly to the next thing to focus. The temporal paradox. And there's a few common ones. The first being the bootstrap paradox, an information paradox where an event causes itself, where the information traveling through time was only able to time travel because it time traveled in the first place. So, for example, if you have a mage character that got the ability to time travel because they stole a spellbook from a stranger from a distant land when they were 7, and they travel back in time and get their spellbook stolen by 7-year-old them, that's the bootstrap paradox. Because that information creates itself and breaks causality. Basically, so like, the origin of that information was them traveling back in time, but they got that information because they stole something from themselves who traveled back in time. There's no place where that information comes from. It just appeared suddenly. Then there's the pedestrian paradox, where a future event causes a past event to happen, which then becomes the cause for the future event. And James' workshop loves doing this to the Eldar. So, let's say that you're a magical space elf that has ruled the galaxy for over 65 million years and mastered the psychic ability of foresight. And since you're a dying race, you want to avoid major military defeats. So you look in the future to scry for how a future battle will go. And you see your army being decimated by the forces of space hell. Obviously you don't want that to happen, so you take steps to avoid it, somehow forgetting to look at what you decided that your plan to avoid it would be in those future events you saw play out. And that inadvertently creates the exact plan that you used in that future vision that lost you the battle in the first place. This is a paradox because the past event relies on the future event happening that caused the past event in the first place, which again breaks causality. Or the grandfather paradox, where the past is changed in a way to negate the conditions required for the time travel in the first place, or the desire to time travel at all. The classics are, of course, killing your grandfather or killing Hitler as a baby. But for a less potentially traumatic one, you realize that time travel is a terrible idea and should have just never been invented. So you go back in time and change the variables of your equation in a way you know you wouldn't notice. But in doing so, the you in the past was either never able to figure out how to time travel, or alternatively, painted the fabric of time red because it only half worked and splattered your brain matter across time and space. So the present you shouldn't exist. But that also means that the future past you never existed, so you never actually erased the board because you didn't exist to erase it, because the you that would have traveled to the future now is just dead. Meaning you existed to fuck up your own formula. And now you've created a stable time loop where it just negates itself over and over again. Okay, then we have Newcomb's paradox, where the existence of time travel very well might invalidate the concept of free will itself. Because if you choose to save yourself the trouble of all these other paradoxes by saying time will sort itself out to make sure it all happens anyways, then no matter what you choose, time ends the same way. Meaning that you don't really have any power to change anything or meaningfully impact time in any way, shape, or form. Which means that your actions are in fact predetermined because the future exists statically already. Or it didn't, and because you observed it, it sure does now. Which is a whole nother thing. And finally, while not really a paradox, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the butterfly effect. Also, I'd probably get firebombed. Basically, this is that every action you do, no matter how small, has massive future consequences. Because how everything happened in the past was perfectly balanced to result in the present. Like, for example, if you go to Victorian England and buy a loaf of bread in period-appropriate clothes with period-appropriate money, gained from period-appropriate means in period-appropriate language, you still changed something. That loaf of bread that was supposed to be there is gone. Which means even if it was bought by a nobody middle class Victorian lady, but you swooped in and got it, maybe that would have been the final straw that caused her and her children to get thrown out on the streets by her horrible, terrible, no good husband. Which then snowballs because now that's a bunch of displaced bodies, and next thing you know, Margaret Thatcher was born poor, and then all the things she did never happened. Look, not everything has to end badly, but that's definitely a different UK. Also, UK listeners, you're welcome. As far as I understand, nobody likes Margaret Thatcher. So, okay, and the final kind of time travel you get is the timey-wimey ball. Named because basically a few of these elements are happening all at the same time, eventually resolving into a single timeline but being very confusing along the way. Don't do this one, please. You will die. By my hand or your own, but you will die. But all of these kinds of story, and even when it's used as just a tool, will depend on a few elements. Like the mutability of your timeline. If your timeline isn't mutable at all, then you shouldn't have time travel at all. If it is mutable, then the degree to which things can change will heavily affect your storyline. Like if, for example, you're going for a sci-fi, semi-barely scientific time travel, and it's only possible to go back a few hours at most, because time hasn't been set in stone yet, and the causality loop hasn't, solidified because events haven't happened yet, then it's not going to be a massive time travel story. Unless you're just doing the same hour over and over again trying to get it right. Or if in your story about time travel based heavily on SCPs and the timeline is extremely mutable, then people will be stepping across timeline and causing paradoxes like they're stepping outside for a quick hit of crack. Of course, also for a time travel story, you need a mechanism for time travel. And this can be everything from a magical spell or ritual, a MacGuffin device, experimental technology, an equation of some sort, a rift in space-time, or some totally realistic scientific device. But you need to have a device. Time travel just doesn't happen at random. You can't just have this, unless that's the point of the story. You also need someone or something that knows about time travel, because ultimately, it doesn't exist, and every story handles it differently. Meaning that when you do one, you have to explain exactly what's happening and how it works. And what's the best way to do that? Have a madman wearing a lab coat with a bleeding nose and way too dilated eyes explain exactly how it works to your main character. Because otherwise, everyone, including your main characters, will be very confused. Unless one of your characters knows what's happening. But of course, the final element you need is a logic system. Because again, this doesn't exist. So it's your job to create the system. How does time travel work in your story? And you don't need to make it realistic, just consistent, with a good internal logic, consistently applied rules, and reasonable. Since the human mind can't really comprehend time travel well, it's your job to think it through and guide people along by the hand through the logic you've already developed. It'll also help you create good causality chains and even guide the story. So yes, very important. But, let's go to history. As we get into it, we gotta mention the fact that time travel is not a new concept. Even in very ancient myth, from Celtic to Japanese, Christian to Buddhist, from ancient Egypt to medieval France, time travel has been a staple of myth for millennia. Like the 1st century BC Jewish tale of a miracle worker, Hani Hamiagal. I'm not gonna try to pronounce that again. I'm gonna try to pronounce that again. Honi HoniHame apostrophe Agel. Hani Hamagel. But basically they encountered a man planting a tree, and when asked about it, he said he was planting it for future generations. And after Hani fell asleep nearby and woke up again, they found it was 70 years later, and the man's grandson was picking fruit from it. Or the 250 AD Christian adage about early Christians hiding from Roman persecution only to emerge 200 years later to a Christianized Rome. But the first story to show backwards time travel is a supplement to the Journey to the West, where Sun Wukong travels back in time through a dream. And in 1733, the first European story where people travel backwards in time is written. Memoirs of the 12th Century, where British ambassadors from 1997 ride back in time to their past counterparts in 1733. And surprisingly, didn't warn them about the whole America thing, or the whole World War thing. By 1770, however, the first true time travel narratives are written. The year 2440, A Dream, if ever there was one, I mean, holy fuck, old book titles, by Louis Sebastian Mercier, is written. And this one is about a guy who gets in an argument with a philosopher about what future societies will look like, falls asleep, and wakes up in future Paris. And when you know it, he was basically right about everything. Also, interesting note, France in this future was apparently both pacifists and also very secular. Which, if you know, France at the time was a very dangerous thing to be saying. Really pissing everyone off there. In America, in 1819, we have Rip Van Winkle written, taking after ancient mythology and Christian and Jewish folklore, where a guy falls asleep in the 1700s before the Revolution after a Dutchman gets him blackout drunk, relatable, and he wakes up in 1819. In 1843, Charles Dickens writes A Christmas Carol, which most people consider to be the prototype of modern time travel narratives. Which, as we can see, not really. It's been written for literally thousands of years. However, it is kind of responsible for the growing popularity of the genre, and the myths surrounding time travel inspires Mark Twain, who writes A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which contrasts and pokes fun at feudalism and industrialism, and modern ingenuity and classical romance. But then the first sci-fi time travel was created in 1895. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. And for just over half a century, no new major changes occur in the genre. Until 1952 with Ray Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder, introducing the idea of the butterfly effect. Where after going off trail during a dinosaur hunt, the main characters discover the present change with the president being fascist and the English language unrecognizable. That sounds familiar. Also, I should make mention, this was during a time in American history where fascism was still considered wrong, and before a decent chunk of the American population thought fascism was pretty cool, because they never once had to fight fascism, and also when their parents and grandparents were telling stories about how horrific World War II is, they weren't listening at all because they were too busy staring off with the lead paint stare. And then with a combination of the 60s to 80s Doctor Who and Back to the Future, the genre of time travel becomes massively popular, rocking it to the levels of trope that we have now. And now it's time to talk about how to do it. Yeah, pretty fast history section there. But hey, in terms of literary genres, time travel hasn't really been fleshed out since, at least a few hundred years ago. So, how do you actually write time travel? I don't fucking know. I hate writing time travel, and I avoid it like the plague. Except to actually avoid it. Not like the anti-mask motherfuckers that say they avoid things like the plague, but actually want the plague to own the libs. So we're going to lean on someone else for this one. And that someone is Kimberly Van Ginkel, a very successful fantasy writer. And she has some tips for how to write a time travel narrative. Also, I think we've used some of her tips before. Her website is very familiar to me. So, first of all, while it's tempting to start in media res for most stories, it's not a particularly stellar idea for the genre. Because time travel tends to be very dense. And so starting in media res means you have to stop a lot anyways to explain what's happening, or your audience may feel lost. Or if you suddenly jump back in the story to explain, It's a very obvious hook that less eases them in and more makes them feel like they've been tricked. Instead, let your audience get to know the characters and how the time travel works before it happens, and then let them experience some of the mystique and mystery alongside the characters as they learn about it together and experience the magic of time travel for the first time as a team. Second, make sure you know exactly what you need to make time travel before you do it the first time. This is the device portion that you need. Make sure it's clear what the device was or if there was no device. Also, keep in mind that, again, since this doesn't exist in real life, anything goes. Meaning you can make basically anything you want. Don't limit yourself on what sounds sciencey. Tell us what the characters know about the rules, how it happens, and why what changes in the first place. But also, you need to create the rules as notes for yourself and keep them handy. And she focuses more on the character side of it. So, are they aware of both timelines, or just one and their memories change? Did anything that happened get rewritten as always having happened, or can nothing at all change? Can the characters act in the time stream, or do they just get to see it? Will time fix itself? Does changing the timeline break causality and cause an unstable time breach that spirals into thousands of changes? You need to keep all this handy and remember what you chose. However, keep in mind that you wrote the rules. So as long as your audience doesn't know the full extent of it, or everything is theoretical and is proven wrong often, you can bend and cheat the rules a bit. As long as it's done in a reasonable way. Or you could pull a Doctor Who and say the time isn't really a fabric or a line, but more a jumble of quantum states and a thick Persian rug. She also recommends keeping a ticking clock. Since stories still need stakes, your time travel story should too. While technically a time traveler could be like Rick and Morty, where it doesn't even matter because you could always pop one universe over and take over from where you died there, that doesn't make for much conflict. So a way to create conflict easily is, ironically, having a time limit. Maybe the machine only works for a certain period of time, or you can only be back in time before time itself corrects and turns you into a subatomic ooze floating outside the universe. Or maybe there's something like a god of time that really doesn't like people fucking with their shit that's always very close to finding you. Stuff like that will add back that sense of urgency. Speaking of which, you can and should add restraints in both the bedroom and your stories. Makes things more interesting. When you add constraints to the time travel, you explain why it isn't the one-size-fits-all solution. Like if a character dies, why not just go back in time and prevent them from dying? Well, maybe the god of death then gets involved, and you can't change time in a way that directly prevents someone's death without them getting pissy. Or maybe the time travel device prevents you from scattering across the time stream by locking in, preventing you from using it while time traveling, and requiring to go back to your own time before you go back again. But when you do, everything that happened already changed, so you can't go back to that exact time. She also suggests choosing a big background, like World War II or the fall of Rome, but make it personal. That the characters have personal stakes in the events happening and have reasons to be invested in it. Like maybe they're time traveling, but it's a personal journey of self-discovery. That they're really struggling with never really apologizing to their grandpa for a falling out that they caused before their grandpa died, and going back to World War II is letting them process the guilt and grief by seeing firsthand what their grandfather went through and helping the people that remind them of him. And finally, of course, try twisting the story in your own unique way. Don't just follow the trope exactly to the end. Find a way that you haven't ever seen done before and, try a twist in that angle. But with that, let's go over to the soapbox. Shut up, phone. I gotta say, I respect the time travel narrative. But that's kind of it. Because I have to admit, I really don't like reading most time travel narratives. they're just very confusing, and that's not really even on the authors. See, I'm a bit of an analyst. I think about things a lot, very deeply. So when I see a time travel story, my first question is almost always why or how? Because even when you think you thought of everything, there's still stuff that doesn't make sense. Like, how do you justify characters still remembering their previous timeline when their histories have been altered? Is it because they're the heroes? How do you justify a character killing someone during a past battle when they weren't supposed to be there? How do you explain diverging timelines? How do you deal with this and that and whatever? How do these things work? And most authors and creators don't really address every single point, which bothers me. And even when they try, they either fuck it up or bog down the story to where it's not fun. Only the very loose time travels like Doctor Who and Back to the Future are fun, but even those change timelines a bunch but don't really focus on it, which bugs me. And it's even worse when I write time travel, or try to write time travel. It fucking bugs me so much and I hate having to do it. So I just don't. And probably won't for a long time. But, hey, everyone has the right to like their own genres and subgenres. And if you really like time travel, more power to you. You're smarter than I am. Or a lot dumber. No judgment. Yeah, hopefully that's not a super surprising take from me. I like my stories with a simple background. Anyways, if you have opinions, advice on how to make the show better, how you write time travel, why I'm wrong and you hate me, and really anything else you want to tell me, make sure to email me at waytatpods@gmail.com. That is WAYTATPODS@gmail.com. Remember to check out my other podcast, WAYTAT, where I do basically the same thing, but with stuff that's normally on time. Ha ha ha. And also remember to follow me on Twitter at WAYTAT_pods for more episode announcements and sometimes a shitpost. Have a good night. Don't murder. Have fun. And remember the original timeline. You changed yours twice already. You can do it again. This has been Why Are You Talking About This Nerd? I've been your host, William. Good night.